I never imagined that my mother's death would be the moment my life truly began. It was 4 in the afternoon when the attorney handed me the keys to the apartment, a penthouse in the heart of Boston, in the same historic neighborhood where she had spent the last 20 years of her life. Beacon Hill. Cobblestone streets, antique gas lamps, red brick facades that tell stories spanning centuries. It was exactly the kind of place Eleanor Parker would choose to live. And to die.
Ethan stood by my side throughout the funeral with that carefully calculated smile I still mistook for support. His hand on my shoulder felt like affection. Only later did I realize it was measurement. I spent the first 3 days in the apartment doing nothing but crying. On the 4th day, I started organizing her belongings.
It was on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, with raindrops tapping against the windows and the scent of lavender, something my mother put in everything, that I found the box. It was hidden at the back of the office closet, behind accounting books she had kept since the 1990s. An ordinary brown cardboard shoebox with my name handwritten on the lid. Natalie.
And after my name, a small heart, just as she always drew when I was a child. Inside were letters, photographs, documents arranged in plastic folders by date, and a sealed envelope marked with a simple instruction. Read this first. I sat down on the floor and opened it. My mother's handwriting remained steady, even during the final weeks of her life. She wrote the same way she spoke, direct, practical, without unnecessary embellishment. The letter began with these words. Natalie, I love you too much to let them steal from you. It took me several seconds to understand what she meant.
Eleanor had begun to suspect Ethan 2 years before she died. Not because of any single event, but because of the questions he asked. About the apartment, about its market value, about how much a renovation would cost. Questions that no genuinely caring son-in-law would ask a mother-in-law who was still alive. Without telling me, she hired a private investigator. She didn't want to hurt me until she was certain. That certainty came in the form of documents. I opened the first folder. It contained a copy of our prenuptial agreement, the one I had signed 6 years earlier on a rushed Friday afternoon because we were supposed to have dinner with his parents afterward. Ethan had told me it was merely a formality, protection for future purposes, nothing important. I trusted him. I signed without reading it carefully because I trusted him. My mother had highlighted a specific clause with a red pen. I read it 3 times to make sure I was understanding it correctly. Inherited assets acquired during a marriage could be considered marital property under certain circumstances, especially if they became integrated into the couple's financial life. The wording was carefully vague, the kind of language lawyers use when they want to leave doors open without the other party noticing. Someone had planned this before our wedding. Someone knew exactly what my mother owned and had built a legal trap long before I said I do at the altar. I closed the folder with trembling hands. The second folder was even worse. Printed photographs on ordinary paper, each with the date and time stamped in the lower right corner. Ethan entering a restaurant in Cambridge with a dark-haired woman. Ethan and the same woman leaving a hotel in the financial district on a Thursday morning. Records of bank transfers to an account I had never seen before, used to pay for dinners, hotel stays, and airline tickets to Miami. Everything was documented with the precision of someone building a case. Her name appeared on one of the photographs, identified by the investigator. Kristen Miller, a colleague from Ethan's department at the consulting firm where he worked. I sat on the office floor for what felt like hours. The rain kept tapping against the window. The scent of lavender still lingered in the air. And piece by piece, I began assembling the true picture of the marriage I had been living in for the past 6 years. He had never loved me.
Or maybe he had at the beginning. But somewhere along the way, I had become a tool, a bridge between him and the wealth my mother had built entirely on her own through decades of hard work. I returned to the envelope. There were still more documents inside. And at the end of the letter, there were instructions. Plans Eleanor had prepared with the same cold precision and sharp intelligence that had always defined her. When Ethan and his parents come to see the apartment, and they will, you are going to tell them that the inheritance comes with debts. Massive debts. Medical treatment costs, loans, obligations I left unresolved. You will show them the documents I prepared with my attorney. They are not fake documents. They are legally plausible scenarios that, in the right hands, appear completely real. Let their greed do the work for you. My mother was smarter than anyone I had ever known. 2 days later, Ethan suggested that his parents come see the apartment. Margaret and Richard Walker arrived on a Sunday afternoon, dressed as though they were attending a business meeting. Margaret wore a beige blazer and examined every room with the calculating eyes I had always mistaken for elegance. Richard stood quietly, performing mental calculations that showed on his face without him realizing it. We sat in the dining room, around the table where my mother had drunk her coffee every morning. I pulled the folder from my bag and placed it on the table. I explained that there was a complication with the inheritance. During the last 2 years of medical treatment, my mother had accumulated significant debts. Health insurance plans that did not cover experimental procedures, loans taken out to pay hospitalization expenses, outstanding balances with specialized clinics in New York and Baltimore. I opened the documents and slid them across the table toward them. The figure at the top of the first page was $2.3 million. Margaret leaned back in her chair as if the paper had burned her fingers. Richard crossed his arms. Ethan looked at me with an expression I had never seen before, a mixture of shock and barely concealed anger. The conversation that followed revealed everything I needed to know. Not one of them asked how I was doing. Not one of them expressed any sympathy for the situation. Instead, what followed was a discussion about financial risk, the legal responsibility of spouses in cases involving inherited debt, and the possibility of quickly selling the apartment before creditors could file legal claims. Richard even said, in so many words, that it might be best for Ethan to formally renounce any claim to the inheritance in order to protect himself legally. I agreed immediately. I told them I completely understood, that I didn't want any of them to suffer consequences because of the problems my mother had supposedly left behind, that it would be the fairest solution for everyone. I looked at Ethan and said we could handle everything formally with an attorney later that very week. He nodded, relieved. The following Wednesday, Ethan signed the formal renunciation before the family's attorney, a 60-year-old man named David Chen, whom my mother had recommended years earlier. The document was precise, definitive, and drafted in a way that would make any future challenge extremely difficult. Ethan skimmed through it with the impatience of someone eager to get rid of a problem, and signed all 3 pages marked with yellow tabs. When he left the office that afternoon, I remained seated. David Chen looked at me over the top of his glasses and said, "Your mother was an extraordinary woman." I agreed. The following week, I hired Margaret Reynolds, the family law attorney Eleanor had recommended in her letter. She was a woman in her 50s, with short gray hair, the kind of person who listened without interrupting and asked surgical questions. I presented all the evidence my mother had gathered. The affair, the money spent on his mistress using marital funds, the manipulated clause in the prenuptial agreement, The records showing conversations between Ethan and his parents discussing strategies to gain access to the apartment even before Eleanor's death. Margaret Reynolds read every page carefully and then said, "We're going to destroy this prenuptial agreement." The divorce proceedings lasted 11 months. Ethan hired 3 different attorneys, each more aggressive than the last. His parents tried everything. They filed appeals challenging the validity of the renunciation. They even claimed that I had presented false information about the debts in order to pressure Ethan into signing the renunciation, a claim that collapsed when David Chen produced the complete documentation showing that every document had been legally valid within its stated terms. Each new attempt generated more evidence against them. Every appeal they filed brought more records to light, more messages, more proof that the Walker family had treated our marriage as a financial operation from the very beginning. The judge presiding over the case was a man of few words, who read every document with visible care. When Margaret Reynolds presented the messages recovered from Ethan's phone, including an exchange with Richard Walker, in which they discussed how much the apartment could generate in a quick sale, sent 2 months before Eleanor's death, the judge remained silent for a long moment. The final ruling was issued on an October afternoon. The prenuptial agreement was invalidated due to bad faith, manipulation, and unequal access to information at the time it was signed. The renunciation remained fully enforceable. The division of assets was ruled in my favor, taking into account Ethan's documented spending on a third party using marital funds. Ethan Walker left that marriage with less than he had entered it with. Today, the Beacon Hill apartment is unquestionably mine, free from any legal dispute or uncertainty. I spent 4 months renovating it while preserving the original details my mother loved: the dark hardwood floors, the antique wall moldings, and the traditional sash windows that let the morning light pour in with a character all their own. I placed plants on every windowsill because she had always wanted to, but never had the time. I returned to my career in graphic design, which I had gradually abandoned during the marriage, because Ethan believed my time should be devoted to other priorities. I have new clients. I have friends I see regularly again. The same friends Ethan had subtly pushed away over the years, without me realizing it at the time. Sometimes, in the late afternoon, I sit by the living room window and look down at the cobblestone street below. My mother didn't leave me only an apartment. She left me an escape route I never knew I needed. She saw what I couldn't see because I was too deep inside it, because I had confused habit with love and tolerance with happiness. Eleanor Parker spent the final months of her life sick and exhausted, gathering evidence, writing letters, and building a plan to free her daughter from a marriage that was never what I believed it to be. That is what I call a true inheritance.